Well, welcome to the Entheogenic Explorers podcast. I'm Kerby. This is my co-host Haley. Welcome aboard. We have with us in the studio today Dr. Martin Ball. Honored to have him here. We were talking obviously before we started the camera how impactful he's been in my life from a facilitator standpoint, and some of the other folks that I work with. Just the knowledge, the expertise, and just as somebody that really started this and created this non-dual energetic therapy. It's an honor to have you, and again, to continue to learn from you. Can you just take a quick minute, introduce yourself for folks that don't know you?
Sure. Well, my name is Martin, and I live in Ashland, Oregon, so just over the border from Northern California. And I've been working in the "quote unquote" psychedelic community pretty much since 2006 with the publication of my book Mushroom Wisdom, which was about psilocybin mushrooms, and then went through a fairly monumental sort of life and personal change in late 2007, and then was introduced to 5-MeO DMT in its fullest form in early 2008. And that was just a revolutionary event for me. And at that point, 5-MeO DMT became my primary focus. And so I was pretty much a very early voice in, the psychedelic community, really in the world, and talking about 5-MeO DMT. And at the time, it was such a revolutionary event for me that I started speaking about it in very strong terms about what I thought the experience was, what it makes available, why it's different from other psychedelics and entheogens. And it was around that time that I gave it the nickname of the God molecule. And that was kind of in response to, back in 2008, DMT really was all the rage. That was like supposedly the top, the best, the greatest, the most wonderful molecule ever. And Rick Strassman's book DMT, the Spirit Molecule, had been out for quite some time, and everybody called it the Spirit Molecule. And you contact these spirits, and you contact these aliens, and you go to all these other realms, and all of this kind of stuff. And I really quickly sort of dismissed all of that and said, you know what, I think all of these are projections of the ego, and this is why, based on the non-dual experience that's made available through 5-MeO DMT. So I said, if people want to call DMT the Spirit Molecule, then we should be calling 5-MeO DMT the God molecule. And it's interesting, I mean, here we are in 2023, and 5-MeO DMT is pretty much universally called the God molecule all around the world now. There's no real pushback on that, but at the time, man, I had people posting online and sending me a message saying I'm a fraud, I'm a charlatan, that I'm just totally full of shit, and I have no idea what I'm talking about. And so there's a lot of pushback, a lot of anger. I would say received a great deal of anger from people, and also, part of my whole package is that I started to look at sort of the whole emphasis on ritual and spirituality and say, all of this also is a manifestation of the ego, and all this trying to appease spirits and say the right prayers and do the right performative gestures, that all of this is actually just reinforcing the ego. So, I was a self-described radical non-dualist at the time, and also in the sense of there have been various non-dual religious and spiritual traditions of the world. And I said, my non-duality doesn't come from any of that. It comes from my own experience, and even ended up rejecting various aspects of some of these non-dual traditions. Like most of them say that there's some kind of linear progression of reincarnation that happens across lifetimes. And I said, you know what? I think that's the ego too, that whole notion, because really there's only one universal consciousness and being that is embodying and manifesting as all of us right here, right now. There is no such thing as a spirit. There is no such thing as a soul. These are all projections of the ego. So I really put myself at odds with pretty much everyone. And people didn't like it when I first started talking about this. But now 5-MeO DMT is far more well-known around the world. People are far more familiar with the experience, at least at some level. So there's been much more acceptance. But anyway, so I've been focusing on 5-MeO DMT for pretty much all of this time period. Also, as I'm an author. I'm a self-published author. I have not ever found a publishing house that wants to get involved with me because I'm a bit too radical in that sense. I've also been the host of the Entheogenic Evolution podcast, which I've run out of my home here in Ashland, Oregon since 2008. And so I'm at 15 years now on my podcast. And I think at this point, I might be the longest continually running podcast on psychedelic subjects. Possibly, I don't know, but I think that that's possible. Also, I have formerly hosted a number of community educational events around psychedelics here in Southern Oregon. Back before COVID disrupted everything, there used to be lots of festivals and stuff that happened locally, and I would organize series of speakers for those festivals. I also ran a conference out of Southern Oregon University, where I was a professor of religion until I got laid off due to cutbacks from coronavirus. So I was doing that up until I was a professor there until spring of 2020, and have been laid off since then. And also, as you know, I was an underground facilitator of 5-MeO-DMT, kind of applying my own rather unique set of criteria and methodology for what I deem to be sort of the most productive and maximizing of the work with 5-MeO-DMT and how to interact with clients at that level. And these days just work as a consultant and integration coach and help people make sense of really looking at their 5-MeO-DMT experience, or really any other psychedelic or entheogenic experience, as part of a process of energetic reformatting that brings people hopefully to a state of greater self-knowledge, greater self-responsibility, greater self-love, self-value and self-worth, and also greater freedom and authenticity in their being. So it's kind of a snapshot of me. Oh, and I'm an artist and musician and like to take photographs.
You touched on about 1,000 things. I'll try to keep my ADHD in check. It's interesting because yes, the term the God molecule. I'll be speaking at a conference in Arizona in May, I think it is, and one of the other speakers, the title of his talk is the God molecule. So it's stuck with some of the highest level. It's become the term, and it is the perfect term. I think if you've had that experience and the full experience, it pretty much nails it, I think. But that being said, that is a big piece. As a facilitator, one of the common question is, well, I've done DMT, right? I've done DMT. What is the difference chemically? We're not chemists, but the basic chemical differences, but more importantly, the experiential differences, in your opinion, between the two DMTs.
Yeah, so really in the world, if we depends on how we're using the term DMT, that they're actually, if we just use that as sort of a subset of tryptamine molecules, there's a huge variety of DMTs, because DMT is a basic tryptamine molecule, and you can add different molecular components to that base molecule at different places on the base molecule, and also in different combinations. So, when we run through the lists of letters and numbers, there is DMT, which is often just called like regular DMT, or that's what people are referring to when they say the spirit molecule. They're talking about DMT, dimethyltryptamine. But then in psilocybin mushrooms, we have 4-HO DMT, which is DMT with a hydrogen oxygen put on the 4 position of that base molecule, and then we get psilocybin. Then we have 5-MeO DMT, which is DMT with a methoxy group that is placed on the 5 position on that molecule. And then there's a huge variety of purely synthetic molecules, such as 4-ACO DMT, and there's 5-MeO MIPT. Well, that's an MIPT. But there's a whole bunch of different ones. So, chemicals are great. They're like these little building blocks, and you can make different molecules with different properties. And all of these function within the human body as forms of neurotransmitters. I think it's just the most basic way of understanding it. So what's happening when we consume any of these molecules is that we have receptor sites in our brain and actually throughout our bodies in various areas where these molecules then attach to, and then they alter the functioning of how our nervous system works. So, in their pure form, they're actually little crystals. So one of the ways that I like to think about it is that we're putting like little differently shaped crystals on our neurotransmitters, and then that is affecting how the energy, right? Literally, our brain functions on electrical energy. That's where we get brain waves from, and we get these little sparks, and that's the brain communicating with itself. And so when we alter the crystalline makeup of our neurotransmitter system, it changes the way that information is delivered across the synapses, and also changes the way that information relates globally through different aspects of different parts of the brain. And it can also fundamentally change our brainwave function. So for example, with 5-MeO-DMT, when people go into a non-dual state, when there is a collapse of the subject-object divide, of the sense of me and not me, me and the universe, me and everything else, that distinction can dissolve away. It doesn't happen automatically, but it's something that can happen. So it's potentiated by the molecule. Our brain goes into a state of hypercoherence when suddenly we're producing gamma waves. And gamma waves, from a neuroscientific perspective, that's associated with deep states of concentration, deep states of focus. So it's been correlated with professional athletes, professional musicians, when they're performing at top level, and also people who are professional meditators, such as monks and things like that they're going into gamma wave, hypocoherent states. And that's what happens with 5-MeO-DMT. So back then to the basic distinction, DMT, which traditionally was, or still is, the base visionary ingredient of ayahuasca. So with this psychedelic tea that is brewed in South America, we have plants that contain DMT that are mixed with plants that contain a monoamine oxidase inhibitor, which prevent enzymes in our stomach from breaking down DMT, and that allows it to be drinkable, so that you can drink ayahuasca and then you have your visionary experience of ayahuasca. And similarly in psilocybin mushrooms, the hydroxy group that's placed on the 4 position of the DMT molecule makes it so that it's edible, that when we eat it, the enzymes in our stomach don't break down the DMT and we can have a quote unquote magic mushroom experience. Now, so these quote unquote regular forms of DMT tend towards being extremely visual. So it enhances the fractal and geometric structure of our visionary apparatus, where people say, oh, reality became pixelated, or everything turned into fractals, everything turned into geometry. And it tends to be very colorful, very bright, and very noticeable at the visual level. And this is why people drink ayahuasca, to have visions. The visions are made out of this geometric fractal matrix that's literally, it's lit up by the DMT. It becomes far more visual at that level. And it also affects all the other senses, from tactile sensations in the body, how we hear, how we taste, how we sense. It impacts our nervous system. And again, these are neurotransmitters that are having an impact on our nervous system and how we perceive and experience and process reality. But primarily what DMT is known for. So then it could also be extracted and made into a pure crystalline form, and it can be smoked or it can be vaporized. And there it's a very rapid psychedelic experience where it pretty much immediately crosses the blood-brain barrier within a number of seconds. And so you can enter into a very psychedelic experience in a very short period of time. And it's also rather fast acting through that modality. So it might be 5 minutes, might be 15 minutes or 20 minutes at the most, and then you're back down to baseline. But that form of DMT, again, is highly visual. So the most common effects that people report from that is a sensation. First, people often talk about feelings of rushes of energy in their body, feeling a lot of movement. They feel like maybe their perspective is leaving their body, maybe going into another realm or another part of the universe or multiverse, whatever people want to say about it. And then encountering beings, entities, objects, places. So what seems to characterize it for the most part, the way that I would describe it, is that it actually, DMT enhances the dualistic function of the ego. It reinforces the sense of me perceiving all of this wild, crazy, out of this world, phenomenal stuff, because it's very psychedelic at the visual level. And so people say, well, I saw these machine elves, or I saw these spirits, or I was in a space station and there were aliens there. And none of that is actually impacting the ego at in a sense of being able to dissolve it or transcend beyond it. So I actually see DMT as mostly reinforcing the ego in various ways, which is not to say that it's worthless or anything like that. It's not to say that it doesn't have value, but it's reinforcing of the ego because it reinforces that sense of I am a subject perceiving these objects and these others within this space. And there are times where it moves beyond that into a non-dual state, and a non-dual state is characterized as the dissolution of the distinction between subject and object, me and not me, what I am and what I am perceiving and experiencing. It all becomes one. There are certainly reports of people having that kind of experience on DMT, but it tends to be rather rare, and it also tends to be very brief, maybe only a few seconds. And then we have people sort of falling back into duality, this sense of separation. So 5-MeO-DMT is extremely different from that. It also, when it is ingested through smoked or vaporized form, it is extremely fast acting. It's also far more powerful than DMT. So you're using far less of the molecule at the molecular weight level. And it, unlike pretty much any other psychedelic, it actually has the potential to completely dissolve the standard habitual energetic patterns of the ego. And this is also a place where I've come out and said, look, the ego is merely a collection of energetic patterns of expression, thought, behavior, and action that are ingrained within us and actually held within the body, and that we identify with them as we become self-aware and self-conscious. We say, oh, I am this way, this is how I am. And so we identify with these aspects, but these are all just relative constructs. And so when faced with the overwhelming energetic onslaught that is 5-MeO-DMT, there's the potential for all of these more limited relativistic patterns to actually dissolve and be transcended on a temporary basis, where then the individual's awareness passes into a completely non-dual state. And that state is, we can characterize it as being infinite, eternal, without boundaries. And then depending on how someone is experiencing it, they might experience it as the culmination of everything and all possibilities and all possible states happening all at once eternally, with which you are identified. Or it might also be experienced as a complete oceanic emptiness in which there is no thing and there's no subject, there's no object. It can also be characterized as sort of this ecstatic, almost orgasmic sense of unconditional love, just this endless outpouring of infinite energy that has no particular structure to it. But there's not a sense of me experiencing that. It's just, this is what I am. This is all that actually exists, and it's all one. And so from the linguistic standpoint, as someone returns, because eventually that energy wanes and starts to die down, and then the structures of the ego automatically start to come back online, and we identify, oh yeah, I'm a person. Oh yeah, I'm the person known as Martin. But then as we come out of that state, then people are able to identify, like, you know what? I think I just experienced God. I experienced this universal consciousness that is the pure energy of unconditional love, that is everyone and everything at all times, and is really the only thing that really exists. And everything is just sort of an expression of that. And then it's me as well, not at the egoic level, but at the genuine level of authentic identity. And so that's where we can use the term the God molecule, that this is a molecule that affects your neurotransmitter system in such a way that you can directly perceive and experience yourself as this universal, unbound consciousness and being. And so when I use the word God, that's what I'm referring to. And I'm not referring to a specific religion, specific monotheism. You know, it's not a dude with a beard sitting up on a cloud judging right and wrong and sending people to heaven or hell. It's not even a creator God. It's not standing back and saying, ah, let there be light, let there be a universe, because actually this is the ground of being. So this is what everything is, and it is not transcendent, it is not beyond reality. It actually is the very matrix in which reality exists, and therefore we can all identify ourselves as that. So it's never a unique statement. It's never oh, Kerby experienced himself as God on 5-MeO-DMT, so Kerby is God, but nobody else is. It's not exclusive. This is the most universal statement anybody could ever make. And it's also the most accurate statement, in my opinion, that anyone could ever make. Because when pressed, who are you really? What are you really? Well, I'm the universal consciousness that's manifesting itself and identified itself as the individual of Kerby or the individual as Martin, but that's what I really am. But that also doesn't override the fact that I'm also the universal consciousness experiencing itself as a human being with all the structures and restrictions of life of what it means to be a human being. Because it doesn't mean, oh, well, if I'm God, I can just do whatever the fuck I want. It's like, no, you're a human being. You might think that it means you can fly, but go ahead, go jump off a building. You're going to fall. Gravity's going to win.
I think that piece, though, and we've kind of had this discussion, the experience of that, not the meme, not what you read in a religious text, but the I am everything, right? And again, I talk to a lot of people that, yeah, I get, there's a getting that on a level. And I think this is one of the few ways that you could actually have that getting it and that experience of that. And the power of that experience is exactly what you said. It moves from this meme or these words to this embodied experience that, oh, I am everything.
Yeah.
And you know this, right? Not just thought it because you read it, but it's a knowing that's powerful. And that's what always strikes me about this molecule is, regardless of most people's religious background, it's almost irrelevant. It's pretty universal, the experience, if they do have that full onset experience, see one with everything, that it breaks down whatever religious structure that they walked into with, or builds one if they have nothing around this I am everything. And that, I don't know how else that would happen. It's that powerful, folks. And I think once it happens, you can't unknow that. So you're walking around with a level of consciousness and this knowing that is going to have an impact in all these aspects of your life. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that that's just such an important way to characterize it. That there is a grave, stark, monumental difference between knowing something intellectually or believing something or thinking something or agreeing with something intellectually or at the faith-based level, into having directly experienced it in every single molecule of your being, where it is, the reality of it is just unquestionable. Because it presents as the most obvious and true thing that you could ever possibly experience. And it puts everything else into perspective. And it's important to keep in mind that every thought that you have, every belief you have, every item of faith that you have is part of your egoic structure. That's your ego talking. That's your ego believing these things. And this is why it really doesn't matter what your religious background is. It doesn't matter what your spiritual background is. You do not need to be religious or spiritual to have this experience at all. And even this is kind of mind-boggling for some people, because I spend all this time writing and talking about the nature of God and the nature of being. And then people ask me, okay, so what are your spiritual practices? And I said, well, nothing. I don't have any spiritual practice. I'm not spiritual at all. I used to identify, before I had this experience, I identified as a spiritual seeker. But you see, that is my ego creating an identity for myself that says, oh, well, I want to seek this knowledge and have this experience so that I can be enlightened, or that I can know what the hell is really going on here, or whatever it may be. But this molecule, I like to refer to it as the great equalizer, that it doesn't matter what your background is, and it doesn't matter what you think or believe, that if you take this molecule and if you allow yourself, and this is very important because it does need to be a choice at some level, if you can allow yourself to go all the way, you can take any person on the planet and they will come back with a fairly similar description to anybody else who goes all the way. And they can come back with the same understanding. So I have a section in my most recent book of Facilitating 5-MeO-DMT. It's an appendix at the back where I talk about how, look, we've had religions arguing over theology and ontology for millennia. And my position is this is 100% obsolete. I don't care what your religion is. And actually, I would like to see people completely move beyond religion and move beyond spirituality, because we all have direct access to the infinite nature of our being right here. And you don't have to do anything religious or spiritual about it. It's not whether you eat meat or don't eat meat. It's not whether you're a nice person or a bad person. It's not whether you are moral or immoral. It's about you getting in touch with the fundamental ground of your being, and that's accessible to anyone.
Yeah. But yeah, I have one thing I'm going to deter. But what I find is that's tough for people to take, right? So even you mentioned earlier, one of the things that it ruffled my feathers a little bit was, and we've had this conversation, there is nothing more. I'm like, but hang on, reincarnation feels nice. I want that to be true, right? So there's these things that we carry into it and that we want to interpret it through that way. So it makes it difficult for some folks because some of these, they're deep, right? They're deep philosophies. There's deep things about it, and that one was a struggle for me. It's like, no, there is nothing more. You are just everything. Why would everything need to do more or be more? And that took a while for me to settle with, right? Because I wanted I wanted something else to be true, if that makes sense, based on like spiritual teachings. I'm like, is this guy wrong? He can't be wrong, because that feels nice to me. But that is just all ego playing itself out. So you're right, there's a truth to it that makes these things undeniable, even if you want to deny them. It just overrides that with just pure authenticity to me.
I'm curious, sort of taking a couple of steps back. We all know that it takes, a certain high enough dose, right, to get into that non-dual space. I'm curious if you think there are benefits to the lower doses. I feel like we're hearing more and more people who are serving kind of micro doses of it, having people, I don't know, learn how to sit in that space where you're still semi-aware, but feeling it. I'm curious to hear if you think there's benefits to that, if that can help sort of, how you say, restructure the energetic systems in your body, or do you feel that you have to do that breakthrough, that non-dual experience to really get a benefit from this molecule?
Great question.
Yeah. I think that if you want to get the maximum benefits from the molecule, you absolutely have to go all the way, because otherwise you just don't know what the real potential is. And, I use myself as an example. So prior to me experiencing a full release dose of 5-MeO-DMT, I had earned my PhD in religious studies. One of my emphasis was on comparative mysticism, altered states of consciousness, and religious experience. I had been somewhat of a practicing Buddhist and philosophical Buddhist for a number of years. And so I accepted the proposition, like, okay, everything actually is one. I've never directly experienced that myself, but I accept that that is a potential and that that's probably true. And I'd had, profound mushroom experiences, and I'd also done years of work with Salvia divinorum, which is just an essentially freaky, weird molecule that I really enjoy, salvinorin A. And then prior to my full experience of 5-MeO-DMT, I had gotten access to Yopo seeds, which contain 5-MeO-DMT, and it kind of experimented some with those. And I had also given an opportunity to experience bufo secretions. And the person who served it to me thought, okay, this is going to be, he's going to have this experience of God. And it was just like, oh, well, yeah, that was interesting. But no, I didn't get it, and then when I finally did get the full experience, it was just like, everything else has just been foreplay. Everything else has just been a tease. Everything else has still been locked within the realm of duality and of subject object and the construction of ego and identity. And oh my God, I've been fucking with myself the whole time. Didn't know it. I was attaching myself to beliefs and identities and didn't even know it. And it was only by going all the way that everything else came into perspective. So my position is it's fine if people want to work with lower doses of 5-MeO DMT, but don't think you're really doing the work, because you're not. Just flat out, you're not. I mean, it's great if you might feel that you're having a good time and that it's helping you. That's great, but you're still working within the construct. And as long as you're doing that, you're in the construct. It's just flat out what it is. Once you've had the full experience, then working with lower levels, I think that's far more effective. So the idea of, okay, we're going to serve you 5-MeO, but we're only just going to give you these little handshake doses, that's not really helping anyone. Now, if those are people who have already gone all the way with it, and so they know, okay, I can actually just follow this and I can just expand and I can go all the way into this experience, and it does not really matter how much I have or how much I don't have, because it's all me anyway. If you already centered yourself within that energetic reality, then even now, just in talking to you about this, you can hear this is altering my voice, this is altering my energy, and I am entering back into that sense of unity right here, right now. And I can also pull it back and I can go back into my ego, and I can speak from the Martin persona, and I can act like Martin, and I can do that because that's just the way reality works. But if you haven't gone all the way, you'll never get there. You can beat around the bush as long as you want and take these little micro doses, and you can feel like, oh, it's making me more spiritual or whatever, but you're probably bullshitting yourself. And this is the thing, is that getting to the fullness of your sense of being, that's what keeps you honest, because now you know, it's like, shit, well, if I'm God, I guess I really don't have a soul. I guess I really am not on a quest for enlightenment. It's like, I'm just doing my thing. I've always been doing my thing. And I've been wrapping identity on top of identity, on top of identity, on top of meaning, on top of purpose, on top of interpretation. And, that's just how the ego functions. It's kind of relentless in that capacity. And so it's only by temporarily transcending it that it puts any of it into perspective. So, yeah, I am not a fan of the idea of we're just going to work at these low levels, because once we get into the big stuff, then then we're worried about, we don't know how to deal with people, and we don't know how to facilitate that. And so if all you're doing is working at the microdose level, then I wouldn't consider anybody who does that to actually be a 5-MeO DMT facilitator. I would consider them maybe to be a microdose facilitator, but you're not working with the full package. And again, it's from my direct experience. The full package experience was so fundamentally revolutionary, so different than anything I'd ever experienced in my life, that it was just obvious. Like,
Right.
This is the beginning, end, middle. This is it, and everything else is below that. And that's where we see all of these identity constructions going on. And it was the most liberating thing I could have ever experienced. And I do think that 5-MeO DMT is the vehicle for doing this. That even when we get into religious and spiritual traditions that emphasize non-duality, I mean, if we go to Buddhism, they say, here are the practices to enter into the non-dual state. And if you do this stuff, 30,000 lifetimes from now, you might actually have the experience. I don't think we have that much time.
It's yeah, and that's spot on. One of the things that we talk about, because we serve some other entheogens, some other medicines, is you see it. Even as folks are having these experiences, we're integrating those experiences. If you've done UFO, if you've done 5-MeO, and you facilitate enough, as you're even hearing these integrations, you're like, that's not it. That's not it. That's still ego. That's still ego. There's just another level to it. And I agree. I mean, I did ayahuasca for 2 years and thought first time I did 5-MeO, it just smashed all of that. And I knew. But to your point, I think now when I go back and use some of the other molecules, they are effective.
Yes.
In that sense, because I have a knowing that I can take it in. It's the analogy we use them. You get your Bufo glasses or you get your 5-MeO glasses. So now this information that you're taking in, you're just seeing with a different prescription. You're seeing with a different lens. So then going back into some of these other medicines afterwards, different experience because it's going through a different lens. But one of the pieces that you work on, non-dual energetic therapy, which we're kind of tapping on, and again, that's something that you are the forefront on. What do you think? And again, we've got a little bit more time here. I've got two questions for you, but the first one is, what is the proper use of this molecule? What is the ideal? What's that? That's probably better. What's the ideal use for it? Who is a perfect candidate for something like this?
Yeah, well, ultimately, I think who is the perfect candidate is anybody who's willing to go through it. And I'm really strongly of the opinion that it is best to educate yourself about this as much as possible before jumping into it. And this is something that I think is really kind of endemic in the psychedelic community in general, is this idea of, well, don't preload me with ideas. I want to go in a completely blank slate. I don't want to know anything about it. And just thinking about, like, would you take a trip to the moon without saying, please don't tell me how anything functions on this rocket. Please don't tell me what I can expect. Please don't tell me how to deal with zero gravity or space-based radiation. Like, no, if you were going to go to the moon, you'd probably want to learn as much as you possibly can about the safety protocol and about possibilities of what might happen and how best to navigate it, as you would. And so 5-MeO is the same thing. This is a radical experience. It is the most radical experience that a human being could ever possibly have. And so the idea that people say, well, I just want to try it. And yeah, I didn't want to know anything about it. I just wanted to enter into this. So I do think that education is very, very important. I think that people should educate themselves first and learn of the radically destabilizing potential of 5-MeO and also the radical liberating potential. And then if they can say, okay, I want to sign up for that, then I think it should be accessible to anyone.
I think if you're facilitating this medicine in a full dose without having upfront interviews with folks and some screening, you're being reckless. Let me just say that. It would be reckless to do it otherwise, I think. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, you've got to make sure that the people that are coming have at least, they need to have some idea of what they're getting into. And they're not going to have a realistic idea, because you can't. I mean, this is one of these things where before having the experience, you literally cannot have any idea, because every idea that we have is an energetic construct within consciousness and is related to our ego of how we are conceptualizing ourselves in the world and the object of our experience. And this is beyond all thought. It's beyond all conceptuality. We can use words to talk about it afterwards that we can agree, like, yeah, that, that word works, that description works. But before it, you can't really know. I mean, we could say, okay, let's assume it's like a really positive, ecstatic experience. We can say, okay, take the best orgasm of your life and now multiply that an infinite number of times and compress it into about 5 minutes, 10 minutes. And people might say, oh, wow, that sounds big. But still, you don't know what that means. I mean, when you experience it, like, okay, so an infinite orgasm, okay, that's a pretty good description. But until you've had an infinite orgasm, you don't know what that really is referring to. So then also, if people are coming to it with the wrong idea of, oh, well, I want to commune with my past lives, come to the wrong place. Or I want to commune with my dead grandmother. Whoa, you're coming to the wrong place. And also, people who are highly attached to ideologies, people who are highly attached to dualistic constructs of thinking, it's going to be challenging for them. And also people who are already mentally or emotionally unstable, it's not necessarily going to make them any better, because this is really monumental. This is really huge. But that being said, if we have our conversations and people know what they're getting into and they can trust the person who's facilitating for them and understand how they work and why they do what they do, then I think it should be available to anybody who wants it. I do consider this to be a fundamental human birthright, to have this level of experience. And that I think it's incredible that this molecule exists, that it has this potential, and that anyone on the planet could have this level of immediate experience of their true nature, I think is just absolutely invaluable. And that we don't need to join a cult. We don't need to join a religion. We don't need to join a church. We don't need to be part of any particular ideology or belief system to have this. It makes it universally accessible in that sense. And then beyond that, I have taken pains to articulate what I see as the best modes of facilitation that will least involve the ego or even tempt the ego, and also maximize the potential for non-dual experience and transformation. And so I do put the non-dual experience at the forefront. I do say that this is ultimately what this is about. And if you're just looking to interact in the dualistic realms, it kind of goes back to the question you asked earlier, kind of in the microdose. It's like you're kind of missing the point. You're missing the potential of what this really is. It's kind of like how meditation has been, and mindfulness has kind of been incorporated into Western culture as part of healthcare and wellness. That like, oh, you're stressed, meditate. Oh, you have anxiety, meditate. And if we go to the Indian religions from which these forms of meditation come from, and the emphasis on mindfulness, meditation is part of the program to help you reach a point of liberation and enlightenment. Meditation is not there to ease your anxiety. Meditation is not there to help you feel less depressed. I mean, it has these effects, but it's like, that's just like the entry level purpose of meditation versus actual entry into a non-dual state so you could directly experience the full nature of your being. That's where meditation has really become watered down in Western culture. That it's like, oh, it's just something that helps me feel better. Like, oh, well, great, but that's not the potential of meditation. But meditation compared to 5-MeO DMT is a very slow, very weak vehicle. So I think that 5-MeO greatly excels in that capacity.
It's super interesting because, again, as you would understand, you facilitate enough of this. I ask everybody before they come in if they meditate, and it's almost universal. Afterwards, you will be drawn to meditation, right? I tried to meditate for 30 years, couldn't do it. Immediately afterwards, my wife said, "Where are you going?" Going downstairs to meditate. It just something about it. And I think because it creates that neuro connection. There's a connection to me. It like opens a door. Maybe it just cracks a door to your authentic self. So it seems more accessible to me after
Yes.
the medication or the
Yeah, far more. Actually, just to jump on that really quickly, I had a consultation with an individual last week who was 75 years old, and he said that he has been part of meditation traditions and working with gurus and teachers and meditation instructors his entire life, going back to his late teens. And he's 75 years old, and he said, and he experienced 5-MeO DMT, and he's like, well, I just wanted to talk to you and confirm, like, this really is it, isn't it? It's like everything I'd done before this wasn't it, but this was it. Am I right that this was it? I was like, yeah. So it changes your relationship to what you perceive as even the potential of meditation or the potential of being in general.
Yeah, I'd say we've got about 7 minutes. I do want to ask you a big question, but I tell folks, Entheogenic Liberation, check out the book. If you're interested in the non-dual energetic therapy, I can't believe this book's still holding. I haven't read a book in a long time. I've read this thing multiple times. I've handed it to multiple people. It's got more highlights in it than anything. If you have any interest in what we're talking about, get this book. It's very well done. And a very good and easy read, actually. I was just blown away by it. And I mean that. When I was reading, I'm like, that's it. It was answering things that I had experienced, but I didn't know how to put them into words, or if I'm like, am I the only one thinking this? So it was like, oh, yes. Last question for you, and I appreciate it. Again, part of doing this for as long as you've been doing it is as a forefront of this, as one of the founders of this, the beginners of this, and creating this non-dual energetic therapy. Again, the objective of the podcast is to help people step into these ceremonies as safely as possible, right? How do you find good facilitation? What should something look like? What are some of the things to look out for? What should or should not happen in a nutshell? What would be your advice? Again, based on your experience, And you do this long enough, you're going to stumble and then regroup and find better ways of doing things. And that's what we're always trying to do from folks, is find out what worked, what didn't work, and then try to improve upon that as best we can. What would be your advice for folks that are interested in having this experience to be able to step into this safely and experience it safely?
Yeah, well, the best thing would be to find someone who really is an authentic human being to serve you. And by that, I mean someone who's not propping themselves up with a lot of props and a lot of identity and a lot of role playing, or a lot of just unnecessary structures of saying, well, I'm going to require you to do these purifications first, and or I am the shaman and this is my role and all of that. That I'm really looking for people who are just genuine, grounded, honest people. That are able to speak from a level of personal experience, a level of knowledge, and who hopefully you can read by their body language that, okay, this person is calm, this person is centered, this person is authentic, they have a good sense of humor, they're direct, they're honest, they're not they're able to answer my questions. They're able to talk to me about it, and they don't just throw a lot of dogma and a lot of structure at me, and is able to talk about it. That there are some people who are serving 5-MeO, and I get their clients afterwards, and they say, yeah, well, the person, they didn't tell me anything about it beforehand. They weren't able to answer any of my questions afterwards. It's like, so, kind of like you were saying, Kerby, have some conversations first, get to know who you're dealing with, and also get to know kind of how they go about it and what they think about it. But really, again, going back to the idea that I'm just looking for people who are authentically embodied as who they are and who are grounded, and come across hopefully as someone, yeah, I can trust this person, I can relate to them, and they're not just full of a bunch of wacky ideas, or they're not ungrounded, people who are running around, or aren't able to be good listeners, not able to actually have conversations, and sometimes what happens is people go to a 5-MeO facilitator and they just overloaded them with information, and they don't ever listen to anything from the other person. It's like, well, is that person listening to you? And I've seen that with clients as well, that sometimes clients come and they just want to tell you everything about themselves, but they don't want to hear anything about what you have to say. And that's also kind of, okay, I think you might be an issue, and hopefully people who are free from their identity, that are able to be their identity. But I like it if you press people and kind of get to, well, who are you really? But I'd like to hear people say is, well, I'm myself. Not, well, I am this ordained, I've received all these credits and I've gone through all these whatever's. It's like, look, this is all an extension of me being myself, and I'm here to help you be yourself. And so we're going to radically alter our experience of reality to see how you do. We're going to do what we can to help steer you into the most effective and transformative aspects of the experience, help you take responsibility for yourself, help you get comfortable with all aspects of your identity and your energy, including the dark, difficult places that you don't want to address. And we welcome that. We're going to help see you through, and we will usher you in. And that's also why I like to call it therapy. I don't like to call it ceremony. And I also like to emphasize, that the idea of therapy is that you're working through a process. That therapy isn't something that you go and get once and then you're done. But the idea that, and it's not even to point out that something's wrong. Usually we do therapy when something's wrong, but it is to kind of acknowledge that the ego is somewhat inherently problematic, as long as we're trapped in it. Then after you get out of it and you clean it out, then the ego becomes much more functional. But the problem is that we attach to aspects of it unconsciously, and we use that to structure and edit and judge ourselves. And so it's not really healthy. That I kind of see humanity as sort of stuck. That I think that the evolution of the human ego is very important, but then we've stayed there. And so then it's my ideology versus yours, my culture versus yours, my political beliefs versus yours. And then we just interact and fight from that level. And it's like, no, let's go beyond that so we can see the unity within all of us. And then we're not as identified with those ideologies, with those divisive belief systems, and we can interact from a more genuine and authentic place. So that's where I see that the therapy is helping to transform people into more authentically embodied versions of themselves, less attached to egoic structures and less likely to be triggered by all of that and engage at that level. So we can actually come from a more evolved, more conscious human perspective of, look, we're all God in human form, doing our best to be ourselves and interact with each other. And can we do that from a place of openness and connection and authentic expression? Or are we just going to put on costumes, put on our beliefs, and keep banging our heads against each other and against the wall and saying, my wall's better than yours, so come bang your head on my wall, damn it. And if you don't, you're out of here.
You described it once in something that I heard, that again, that we create these identities and we spend our entire lives trying to defend them. And I find that exhausting.
Yes,
uh,
yes.
and until you can see that that's what's happening. And if you're like, we walk around, I'm like, I know you're in there. You don't know you're in there, but I know you're in there. But all you want to do is, hi, I'm just, here's all my stuff. Here's everything about me. But until you know that, it's very difficult to understand that. We got 2 minutes. I want to give you the floor for anything that you want to close on, any pieces of information that you'd like to share, anything about yourself you'd want to share, some of your art, your music, anything.
Yeah, well, I guess I'd jump on the fact that you've mentioned Entheogenic Liberation. I wrote that in 2017, and it's still my best-selling book today. And I do think it is the most comprehensive thing that's ever been written about the 5-MeO DMT experience. I don't, there's been a few other authors writing in the area, but in my honest opinion, there's nothing that's even remotely comparable to what I've put out there. And even sometimes people hearing that and like, oh my God, there's so much ego. And it's like, look, I'm just trying to be honest that I really have a deep and intimate knowledge of how this molecule works. I've been through all of it myself. And I wrote the book that was not available to me when I was going through all of this. And so I do really recommend that anybody who's even thinking of working with 5-MeO DMT, read the book first. And I mean, this is one of the most universal comments that I get from people is they say, man, I wish I read that before I had this experience. It's really helping me now afterwards, but man, I wish I read it before. And so I do recommend educate yourself about it. And also be prepared to be challenged, that reality is not what you think it is. It is not what you believe it is. And it doesn't really matter how much faith or belief you put into anything. When you actually encounter the fullness of reality, it will be obvious, and be willing to let your stuff go. And I'd also say for anybody out there who's having trouble with their experience or integrating or learning how to really work in sort of this new modality, that's where I am available to have conversations with people. And I really enjoy doing that. I offer 30 and 60 and 90-minute consultations, video calls. And it's something that I've seen really change over the years, where now, I mean, I deal with people around the world who are working with 5-MeO DMT. And I also work with people who facilitate as well. And sometimes they come to me and say, wow, I had this really difficult case or this weird thing happen. Have you seen this? Have you heard of this? And, okay, yep, yeah, I know what we're talking about. And so I help guide facilitators as well. And also my podcast, The Entheogenic Evolution, ever since its inception in 2008, has really been a home to talking about 5-MeO DMT, bringing on other people who experience this molecule or work with it. And it still is to this day. So it's where I'm regularly posting interviews with people who work with it. And I am a little bit selective, that I don't want to necessarily bring someone on who's like, oh, I'm going to spend my whole time talking about reincarnation and the ancestors. But I do try and let people speak for themselves, present their own views. I don't, even though I am very strong in my own views and my own opinions based on my own experience, I don't lord that over other people in interviews and let them speak for themselves. And so it's a place where you get a lot of diverse perspectives. And so I invite people to check out my work if they haven't. And, also be aware that there's a lot of people that I have made very uncomfortable over the years. And I've challenged a lot of people's beliefs and a lot of people's views about what's right or wrong or what reality is or isn't. So I'm someone who's received a lot of hate mail, a lot of trolls. I've had campaigns against me. And ultimately, I'm just a guy who sits in his office and, talks to people and makes art and music. But I've been called the Antichrist. I've been called demon possessed. I've been called a psychopath. But I tend to think of myself as a well-rounded, well-integrated person who's just doing his best to be himself and make a contribution to the world in a way that hopefully is transformative and positive. So,
Well, I talk to you periodically. I'm one of those folks to love to reach out because we're always trying to improve and grow and learn. And you're obviously extremely knowledgeable on it, and you're a good person to talk with. So I appreciate that. And we appreciate you giving us some time today. Thank you for that.
yeah, well, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it. Enjoyed speaking with you both.
Thank you, sir.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah, nice to meet you too.
Well, thank you, sir.